There's, there really are days where I just want to be like, no, I'm not going to record this.
I bet.
Because it makes you take notes. Why should I teach this twice? Because no, it means you care if you take notes. It's all right. Okay, so if you have kind of semi-complex objects and you want to add an image to them in order to get them to look a certain way, it's really helpful to be able to, well, I mean, this is called texturing, essentially. Textures are just image files that you can apply to 3D models in order to simulate what something would look like. You wouldn't normally model something like every little nook and cranny of like this marbling, for instance. There's no reason to do that, right? You wouldn't make every tiny little bump and protrusion and assign it a different like blue or gray or pebble color or whatever. That takes forever. It makes no sense, and used to not be able to do it. Period. I'm gonna download this one. Oh, I want the seamless one. Well, how much is premium? How do I get premium access? Credit packs. $20 for 250 credits. Okay. You guys are gonna see all my billing information. Look at that. Okay. Pay by. Oh, I can. Okay, PayPal. Sweet. I get to expense this. Maybe I should just do this with ones you guys can access. I should just do this with ones you guys can access. Okay, never mind. Okay, so let's go back to the marbling. I was gonna grab the seamless one because what's gonna happen? I can grab the lower res one. What happens is these are of course larger images, so they're higher quality. This is a seamless texture, which means it's been meant to be tiled and not look like it's being tiled, right? Like have multiple instances of this texture placed across a large object and not have it look that way. Whereas this one is not seamless, so you'll be able to see where the edges are. But we'll use the lower res. The texture might look a little fuzzy, but the higher res image you use, the sharper, of course, than the texture is. So this image, let me save it where it needs to be saved. Actually, I have no idea if that's where it needs to be saved. All right. I usually make a a folder called textures. That is where my Blender files are as well. It's a subdirectory for the directory that has my Blender files. Because when we're adding a node, when we're doing adding textures with nodes, we need to be able to link to that image file. It's just like if you're embedding placing an image in Illustrator or Photoshop. You're not actually copying that image over into the file. You're just creating a link to it. If you built a website, this is how you include websites or images onto websites, right? You're linking to wherever that image is in the project directory. Where it lives is very important. If you move it, you will break the link to the texture, and you'll get this really awesome looking purple color. You don't want that generally. Okay. So when we're starting off with a image, called marble, you make a material just like you would normally. Generally, you're going to feed your texture into a diffuse shader. Okay. There are lots of different textures. There are all kinds of generative textures, and what these means is there are algorithms that make these textures. So there's a brick texture. I have no idea what this looks like. So that is generated brick, right? Fake brick. Drop some ambient in here. It's not terrible. Actually, it looks pretty terrible on here because we haven't UV unmapped this or anything yet. You can kind of change the colors of it, play with it. There are checkers. All right, this is a good one for like testing out objects and kind of seeing if you're unwrapping your object correctly. Right. Throw a texture on it to see how the squares line up. And actually, I probably picked one of the more difficult objects to unwrap. Environmental textures. This environmental texture is a little weird. So this wants an image, okay? And when it feeds it, when it gets an image, what it's going to do is want this texture to be sort of like the light source for the environment. All right, this is what we. Where am I going? This is these are called HDRs. Here we go. So high dynamic range images. These are images that generate light inside the world. Okay, so these would emit light out into the rest of the world. You generally never stick these on objects. Okay, usually what you do is you'll go to your world tab, tell your surface to use nodes. You can kind of come over here actually and do this. And then you would build it in here. And so you'd change your color to an environmental texture, and then open that up. That purple right there, that's the broken link purple. I hate purple, but I kind of like that color. I really hate purple. Which sucks because it's my daughter's like favorite color right now. So there, that gets me purple. You won't see the image if you're in orthographic. You'll just see sort of like different colors changing and things because it kind of just like averages out the color for the angle you're at. But if you go into perspective, then you'll see the world. Right, and you get different qualities based off of like how big of an image. You can see I've got a 500 megabyte image here, the 16K. So this is the best quality because what it's doing is it's creating light based off of every different colored pixel in the image. Right, so it's really complex light, but it's very realistic light. So if this will probably crash Blender, but we'll see. Loading. Oh, that's not bad. It's actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Let me take this one off. So we get some realistic, really realistic lighting on here. This will also just destroy your render times. So use sparingly. It's really good, but use it sparingly. Okay. You're not going to need to use it for now. All right, let me go back to color. My surface. Uh-oh. I don't know how to get back to it, actually. It's not any of these. All right, we're just gonna use the kite texture, I guess. So, okay. Let's go back to object texturing. So then, yeah, our object texture. We're not gonna use environmental. Image, this is the one you're probably going to use the most. Magic is kind of fun. I don't know what magic is actually used for, but what I've used it for in the past is generating some really weird colors, scaling them in weird ways, changing the distortion to get just like bizarre patterns. If you like crank the depth down and scale it, you can get some really interesting, I don't know, just really interesting patterns. All of these things, like all the generative ones, have their uses. Usually you're going to use them for generating like displacement maps, which will modify how a shape looks according to certain other parameters. The one you're going to use the most is going to be the image texture. All right. So you connect your color nodes, open it up, and link to an image. Blends, texture, it's like our marble, right? Now, you probably look like this the first time you do it if you have not unwrapped your object yet, okay? Now, unwrapping just means going into edit mode and telling Blender how it should think of this object as a flat plane, all right? Because right now, it is definitely not. This is like how you do globes, right? Globes are flat planes. There's nothing going on here. if I had unwrapped this object, I would see sort of a flat series of faces and stuff here in my image editor. Okay, you can open up an image editor and then go to open and open your texture to see how it's going to map onto your texture to get a sense of it. You can also modify it, right? So what we can do, there's a couple different options for this. There is manually unwrapping, creating seams, and then there is using the automatic unwrapping. Okay, automatic unwrapping is probably going to be good for 90% of your use cases. All right. The only time it's not great is if you're doing like a character, like a face or a person and body that has a very specific texture map, or something else that has very specific parts of the image that need to go coincide with specific parts of the model. So to do the automatic one, you're in edit mode, you have everything selected, you hit U to get your UV mapping tools. If you're dealing with a simple primitive shape like a cube, a cylinder, or a sphere, you can unmap according to those. The ICO is more or less a sphere, so we're going to do sphere projection, and then you can see how it unwrapped it. Now obviously it kind of screwed it up. So I can scale it down, I can hit G to grab it and move it over. I can even grab just like a point and kind of move that over, just to get everything on the image. If I look at it now, that's what that looks like. Looks pretty bad. It looks bad mostly because this is a really low res texture, right? If I had the higher res image, I do, but don't I? Or I didn't save it. Okay. So yeah, it's going to look bad because of that, for the most part. Other things we can do, you can try out different ways. So still in edit mode, we can hit U again. We could do smart UV project. Let's do just UV unwrap. Straight up unwrap. It's more or less the same as the sphere projection. Let's go smart UV. Tell it, okay, so a couple different options for smart UV. Angle limit. That's the angle of the faces on an object. Like, so if you're coming off of one face, and then the angle that goes down or up to the next face, okay? What it's wanting to know is what's the maximum angle that you should consider those faces to be connected. Okay, so that's 60. Anything under 66% or 66 degrees, it will try to consider that as a connected face. Otherwise, it will make a seam and split it. Okay, does that make sense? All right, island margins. How if it does have to just cut off things that aren't connected, how much space should it put between all the other little islands? Okay, and then area weights. That's for animation. Don't worry about that. I usually do 0.3, which is like the very minimum for islands. And then you can see here, up here, it cut it into 6 individual islands and laid them out. And that does subtly change the texture now. You can kind of see some seams in a few places. You can see how it's wrapping here. A little bit. It's not the best. There's the face for that one. So there's some things you can do after you've unwrapped it like this to try to make it look a little better if all you have is a really crappy texture. You can add a vector node and an input node. It's a texture coordinate. So you're going to add mapping and texture. Oops, zoom in there. You can add texture mapping and texture coordinate systems. So connect the vector for that, and then by default we're going to use the UUV. It's usually what it's using anyway, so you won't see any change. But if you do normals, this is going to add that texture to all the different normals. So let me go back into rendered mode. So that's what it looks like when it's set to normals. That's UV. Generated is just sort of default. So I'm going to stretch it. Object, orientation of the object. So you're going to see stretching sort of at the equator. Camera, it's going to align that texture with the camera. Now here's something really interesting about this. So with the camera, what it's doing is it's making the outline or the silhouette of that object kind of like a hole, and then just putting a flat texture in there. So if I move this camera, the texture stays the same. right? It's kind of like a neat optical illusion, actually. So the object is moving and the light source is moving, but the texture is staying oriented the same with the camera. Does that make sense? All right. Window kind of going to be the same as the camera. It's just a little stretched. And then reflection. Also be kind of weird and get some neat effects. But, all right, UV. UV. Oh, it didn't stick. I was like, wow, UV just looks just like reflection. All right, UV. So some things we can do is we can up the scale on the X and the Y. And that already looks a little bit better. Just makes it smaller. Okay. So that already, yeah, that looks a lot better actually. 5 might get a little nuts. Try to do it equally when you're upping the scale, otherwise you'll get stretching. That looks pretty good actually. Yeah. That's not terrible. It's a little dim on there, but it's not terrible. So those are different ways of using textures. I know when I showed Kelsey how to do her concrete texture, it was very much the same. Concrete. So this concrete one is different, of course, because A, it's not seamless, and it also has a bunch of interesting textures in it, like it's a very different image. So what is you're probably going to want to do for this is a little different than what you would do for the marble one. You'll see that this has been, let me open the concrete one so we can kind of see how it's mapped. So it's mapped the same. Actually, don't think I like that at all. So you might want to do like a sphere projection on it to get it to map a little differently. And that's mostly, like you would do that mostly because, sorry, it's freaking out. You're doing that because it has that big feature in it, right? And you don't want that feature to get cut up and disconnected from itself. So you want that feature to be as a whole across the image, okay? So you would need to change how the object itself is unwrapped, or Blender just dies. We'll see what happens. Okay, so you see how the difference there? I didn't want a bunch of islands cut up. I just wanted, it's a little weird here. I just wanted this feature here to be all the way across the object, and then you can really see where that seam is because it's not a seamless texture. So you just have to be very, very careful of that. All right. So it looks like with this sphere projection, what happened here? We'll do a manual sphere projection. So what happened with the sphere projection is when Blender was trying to figure it out, it was trying to decide, okay, where's my pole? Where's my top? And then how do I slice this down? How do I find a seam that goes all the way down to sort of unwrap and flatten this object? And you can tell it really distorted some of the sizes of the object. Like these are the pole objects, or the not pole objects, but the pole faces. So that one, that's a big distortion. Is that this one? Let's change the face mode. That one. So that one, see how distorted that one gets relative to the other ones? The other ones are all pretty much the same, but that one gets super distorted. That one's really distorted. You know, those are all really distorted. So Blender's just sort of picking what it thinks needs to be the places to split it. Okay, and we can do this. You might end up spending a lot of time doing this, like picking these sorts of places to seam. But what I usually do, if I'm doing this, I go into edge mode, and I start selecting my edges. So like Shift. Maybe I want to cut it here. So I'm holding Shift and just selecting my edges. Come back up this way. There we go. And I'm doing this totally arbitrarily right now. That's not going to cut well, but we'll see it. You do that, and I always forget the keyboard shortcut for seams. Nope. Arc seam, mesh, mark seam. It's a shortcut, that's why I don't want to show you. Anybody see it? Transform? No. Show hide. Elements. Cleanup. Normals. Edges. Here, edges. Mark seam. Oh, I guess there isn't one. Alright, there's no keyboard shortcut for it. Anyway, you're going to just mark the seam. And what it's going to do is create this red line so that when you go to UV unwrap it, it treats that red line as a place to split it. Okay? If you make the red line connect, it will cut two islands. Alright, so now if we look at it that way, you can kind of see what it did there. I split it across here. But you can also, you can come in here and be like, no, I don't really like how that's oriented. I'm going to rotate it and try to figure out how I could line that up. Maybe like that, right? So I can line that part up a little bit more. So you really have kind of a lot of control over how your texture is oriented. The same thing goes for like wood. Like if we do like a wood texture, let's find a wood texture really quick. Wood. So this would be kind of interesting. If it shows you a preview and it's not square, then it's not seamless. Shows you one that's square, then it'll have a seamless version. So we'll do this one. You don't have to pick seamless. They're easier to tile. Put it in the textures. All right. Change it. Wood rough. All right, so that's what that looks like right now. Obviously, not great. So let's mark this. Can I remove the seams? Yeah, clear the seams. Double check that it cleared all your seams. Good. UV unwrap it. Let's do sphere projection again. Oh, that is the wrong texture. All right. Kind of see how that worked. Notice it's doing some like funkiness up here. It's not the best thing in the world. Up your scale to get more, but then yeah, we've got a very weird seam right there. Let's try just smart UV project. Nope. Or straight up unwrap. Nope, more or less the same. We could try a cube projection. Ha, that made a mess, didn't it? Or, yeah, let's do... it still has a really gross area. So, if you wanted to, you could come in and kind of figure out what's what, if you really wanted this texture on here. So what I would do is change the face mode and kind of select it and be like, oh, okay, that's where that's getting distorted and stretched, so I can kind of alter it and make it not so distorted and stretched. And you can try to line it up, decide how you want that to look. The thing, though, is if you are changing values over here in your mapping, notice how when I go into rendered, it gets smaller, right? When I come back to just texture view, it's just showing me the straight up texture. It's not taking into account any alterations I've done in the mapping node. All right? Anytime you change anything in the mapping node, that only shows up in the rendered view. Okay? All right. Same goes like if I switch to material, oh, okay, material is showing it to me. Oh, that's good. All right, so yeah, switch to material then. So you can kind of alter these to get it to kind of try to line up any way that you want to or can. It's just going to be, if you want to make it smaller, to make them bigger, etc. You guys got to take off? All right. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Wood is one of the more difficult ones to do.
Can I email? Did you read an email that I sent to you?
I will never read an email, ever.
It's really Wednesday morning.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I've already sent it up. Okay.
Yeah.
I will
Yep.
email you after we get our practice.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
So yeah, so that's one way to play with it. Wood is difficult. All right, I'm just gonna throw that out there, especially if you have a non-regular shape. All right, if you're dealing with something rectilinear like a box or a square, like Fletcher's shelves, wood is easy to do on shapes like that. All right, because those are flat planes and then they change, and we sort of expect the texture to change along those planes. All right, but if we have like a ball like this, we don't expect the texture to change that much. All right, so it can be a little difficult. So you got to be very careful with it. This is not required by any means, but there is something called the Cycles Material Vault. I'll show it to you. It is a library of Blender Cycles materials. There are many volumes, and they have some really nice textures. So they make stuff like this. They can make stuff look like this. There's other things that go into this besides just having this look like this. So as you can see, there are quite a few nice ones. I have Volume 1 installed here, and it does make some nice objects. If you want to buy it, you can and use it. That is fine. I would rather, though, you try making these on your own, and also it's a little expensive. Okay. So do it. Assign the material. Get a nice little rock around. But this is what it does. It creates a very complex material node or material. All right. But it's also good to I learned a lot about materials ever since I bought the Vault, because I go into them and I look at them and I'm like, oh, that's how they're putting it together. That's how they're making this work. That's how they're overlapping all these different nodes and techniques and stuff. So, it can be useful. It can be useful. But it is, like I said, expensive, and the website is very slow. So use that if you want to, but I would rather you try doing this on your own first. I want to make this all at first. Okay. All right. Any questions on how to apply basic materials? No? All right. UV unwrapping is, again, the most important part. So when you UV unwrap something, you need to have all the faces selected. Hit U. You've got many different types, so it helps to know what kind of object, right? But there aren't so many that it's not terrible to brute force it and just sort of go through and unwrap them in a bunch of different ways to see what gives you the best sort of basic, gets you closest to the effect that you want. You may still need to go in manually to the unwrap on the image and alter it. Okay. I find it easier sometimes to just grab that face and just adjust it. So here on this one, look how messed up that one is. So I would grab these and then grab both of these, scale it down to try to match it. Maybe I know I want all of these to be sort of scaled down the right way to get them to match. However you can, without it looking too goopy. Okay, so you can do a lot of that. All right, any questions on this? No? All right, let's spend the rest of the class